That's great, Alex, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to the now 29th in the hot seat session. And this is the 7th virtual session we've had since we changed our gauge from March last year. Very warm welcome to everybody, and absolutely delighted to welcome our speaker this evening. She's a great personal friend. It's her second in the hot seat, one face-to-face in the House of Commons, the other one tonight. And I'm going back to pre-parliamentary days with Esther. When I first met Esther, there were many things that struck me about her as a human being. Her enthusiasm, her down-to-earth approach, her easy manner, and perhaps most importantly, her principled approach to her life and her politics. And I think it was these same qualities that one saw in her role as a TV presenter when she double hosted GMTV with Eamon Holmes. And then as she set up her own business specializing in SMEs. She entered Parliament first for Wirral West, and then in 2017 for the wonderful constituency, being very biased, the wonderful constituency of Tatton. Many of you might know it as sort of Knutsford, Wilmslow in Cheshire. She then held a series of shadow cabinet and then cabinet positions, including being Deputy Chief Government Whip. And I saw it as her principles again coming to the fore when Esther resigned from the cabinet in opposition to the then Brexit negotiations. It takes a determined and principled person to resign from the cabinet. Everything she does, she approaches with total commitment and enthusiasm. And indeed tonight, when we were talking about what she should lead off on, she said to me, well, Don, what about, will we retain the working class vote? Ladies and gentlemen, a real pleasure, the Right Honourable Esther McVey.
Yeah, thank you. Even though the mic's are muted, I saw somebody doing this. Thank you very much indeed. It was Michael there. Thank you very much indeed. Well, I think this will be one of our biggest questions as a party. How do we retain that working class vote? Obviously, if we want a strong majority again, and it is with that vote that we've got an 80-seat majority. If we want to remain the party in government, we really do need to understand that voter and how to support them. I say understand that voter, but that voter is more conservative than you think. That voter believes in aspiration, ambition, wanting more for their children than they've had for themselves. Success is not a dirty word. They're happy to have success and the trappings of success, and wanting to go out into the world and achieve. But what had gone wrong for so many years is those voters had, by some misguided belief, that the Labour Party was for them, fundamentally because of the historical ties with the Labour Party. They had always voted Labour. In fact, when I have knocked on doors for over 20 years in working class areas, they frequently said, Esther, you know, I agree with what you're saying, I like with what you're saying, but my dad or my mum would turn in their grave if they knew we were going to vote Conservative. So it wasn't anything I was saying, it wasn't that we weren't attuned, it was because they believed this is what needed to do. But over those 20 years that I've been knocking on doors, the shift was already happening. The shift from Labour to Conservative was already happening, and you'll see that if you look at the votes in many seats. Quite a lot have moved across, obviously, when we made that coalition, when David Cameron got in 2010, more were coming over 2015, 17, there was a little bit of a sort of judder, and then they all collapsed across that wall, that red wall broke in 2019. But as I was an MP sitting on the green benches, from the back bench then into the front bench, you could see, looking at the Labour Party, they had nothing in common with their working class voter. Not at all. In fact, many of us used to smile and say they wouldn't even know a working class voter if they fell over one. They just weren't attuned at all. So what is it then that happened on this journey as we moved across? One, the Labour voters started to see that these people didn't represent them. They were more interested in the metropolitan elite. They were more interested in sort of inner city, Islington, London than it were them. They were telling them what they should be doing rather than actually knowing instinctively what their voter wanted. So that was the first thing that happened. Then the next thing layered upon that, obviously, was the Brexit vote. And that was people talking about they wanted control over their life. They wanted to have the same opportunities and chances that other people had. They wanted to make sure, as I said, their children could do better than them. But what happened with the Brexit vote, in many of these northern seats, your Bishop Auckland, your Ashfields, your Bolton, your Burys, your Manchester areas, many of these seats wanted Brexit, but what were their Labour MPs telling them? They told them they'd made a mistake. They told them that they were wrong. They told them that they were thick, ignorant, racist, and that they would not hold or share their views. They needed to change their views. They got it all wrong. Well, you know, you can only say that to your voters for a short period of time before they start saying, actually, we don't want to be with you anymore. And actually, the Labour Party had said that to their voters for quite significant time over things like welfare, over immigration, over crime, over sentencing. But it was actually the Brexit vote that really upset the Labour voters the most. And as I said, it was because they so wanted to distance themselves, the Labour Party, from what their voters had done. And really, it was that really was the straw that broke the camel's back. So when we went round in 2019, everybody was moving across. And let me say, it wasn't just the Brexit vote. It wasn't just this journey those voters had been on for 20 years. It was also Corbyn as the leader of the Labour Party. He was anti-patriotic. He was anti, as it seemed, this country. He was anti the royal forces, anti the armed forces, anti the royal family. And so these Labour voters who were so intrinsically conservative could no longer vote for the Labour Party. But if I give you a couple of examples of seats, if you looked, and that's why I say, if you look at the shift that was happening for 20 years, places like Sedgefield, which was Tony Blair's seat, who won with a 20-odd thousand majority. Over the years, it trickled away, until we now have a Conservative MP, Paul Howell, with a 4,500 Conservative majority. You've got the same thing in Dennis Skinner's seat. He won that seat, Bolsover, with a 70% majority in that seat. It trickled away, and we now have a Conservative MP there, again with a 4,500 majority. And that happened in your Derbyshires, that happened in your Mansfield, in your Ashfield, right across the country. But you can see it had happened for a long period of time. Now, let me just say, the first person to win over this Labour vote was Margaret Thatcher. And that was in all of your Essexy seats and your Outer London seats. That was Mondeo man and Essex man going back to the 1980s. And those people never, ever went back to the Labour Party because they were aligned to our values, as I said, of aspiration, of hard work, of self-starters, of the state not getting involved in your life, but you going forward and doing what you want to do. And that is why, and I'll end here, and we'll have lots of questions back and forth, and that is why I believe we can keep those red wall seats, now a blue wall seats, that we won under Boris Johnson. So Boris Johnson definitely chimed with those people. They felt they could vote for him. We've won them over. And just like Margaret Thatcher made sure that those Essex seats never went back to the Labour Party, I believe we can keep a hold of them. And why I think that, whereas Keir Starmer is absolutely a better leader than Corbyn. Of course, he's a barrister. He's used to the cut and thrust of being in court, as it were. He's good in the chamber, but he intrinsically does not understand this voter either. In fact, we've seen that shambles now within the Labour Party. We've seen that shambles now where they did polling, where they said, stand in front of the flag, stand with sort of the army behind you, pretend to be patriotic. Unfortunately, that made the newspapers. So everybody knows he does not intrinsically understand most people in this country. Most people in this country are a conservative with a small c. And just look at one of the MPs that we've now got, Lee Anderson, who is the MP for Ashfield. And he is exactly one of these people who were Labour by some misapprehension that they should be voting Labour because their dad did. He was a Labour councillor. He worked for a Labour MP, Gloria de Pierio, when she was there. He then said, oh my goodness, we have nothing in common. And it wasn't just Brexit, although that was the movement. It was about, as I said, crime, immigration, welfare, and basically a talking down to people who want to get on in life. So we've got it all, you know, to keep a hold of. I actually think our problem will be in the working professional class. I think Keir Starmer will chime more with them than he will with the working class. I think that is where we'll have to keep a hold of our vote. I can imagine people say, oh, you know, you could bring Keir home for tea. You know, we wouldn't mind sitting round a dinner table with him. We certainly wouldn't have had Jeremy Corbyn round our dinner table, but we could understand Keir Starmer. So I think we've got to watch out that we don't lose our middle and professional classes. We've got to make sure we deliver Brexit, that we get that Brexit dividend, that we get that free trading that people wanted. So we've got to make sure that we deliver this. We've also got to go back to our libertarian roots, our freedoms, not some sort of authoritarian state where we tell people what they should do. Personal responsibility is what we believe in. Choice is what we believe in. Freedom of expression, as I said, freedom of choice, all these things is what we've got to get back, because it is actually the working classes who absolutely believe in all those things. So I will end there, and please ask me any questions you can, and then I can also tell you why I stood for leadership. Boris Johnson was always going to be leader, but why did I stand? It was because I'd set up the group Blue Collar Conservatives back in 2012. So I've been working on this and working with the working classes all my life, but I set up the group then. And when I knew I wouldn't be leader, Boris absolutely should have been. He was the person who had the Brexit vote behind him. He was the person who was going to win, but he took on board the blue collar policies to go into the general election, because it was those blue collar policies that actually made sure that he got those votes. So he was as good as his word to me, took on our policies, and that's how we got that 80-seat majority, because they chimed with the belief system of those working class voters.